PR Connections Radio presents.
There's a piece we've written talking about love as a foundation for social justice, right? Which includes what you just said. I love that Corinthians piece. I think it's just beautiful. It's more than just an emotion, right? Or a personal feeling. It's a powerful, active force, as you said, discipline and potentiality for pursuing various forms of liberation, which can build a foundation of belonging for all. Social justice manifests through individual and collective power and love, joining together and apart, right? Because I think there's a Eurocentric propensity. Let's all agree, right? And then we'll
absolutely,
as opposed to, and the pieces that are different kind of get pushed to the side, which is part of my impulse around the religious and spiritual piece.
Next time, can we talk a little bit more about the discipline of love and do something?
Absolutely.
Well, that was not the clip we had in mind, was it?
All right.
All right. I don't know, Andrea, if you can get the real clip ready, that would be great. If you can find it. But I just wanted that particular clip. I love it. They're all good. Welcome, warm welcome to prconnectionsradio.com. This is your show, the Voices of Humanity. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, we're coming out of prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media. I am your host, Sandra McKechnie. Wonderful to be here. And we are extremely grateful to connect with you in this way. It's a real privilege. I said to Lori last week that we make enough of these and we have some good content and they're out there. And anybody can land on one of them. And so I think that's an exciting thought. And a lot of this content has really served to really enrich, transform. And I'm still being transformed. I've become aware of my unawareness about many things. I'm going to be 60 on Wednesday. I'm thrilled. November 1st. I slid out of my mother's inner parts, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful ride. I didn't think so a few years ago, but I feel like I've reached the point, and I said it last time, that I am giving birth to the person that I authentically feel I'm supposed to be. And this is a great thing. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining us. We're thrilled that you are here. And I hope that we can connect together and give you something authentic. Again, I've been listening to a gentleman by the name of Gabor Mate and his little piece on authenticity. Lori, like I was saying before, I love it. Coming out of the womb and just being, all you think about is your gut, when you're going to get fed next, and you are crying, you don't care, you're pooping your pants, you're just authentically, you're not thinking about past, future, all of that. And the way he puts it is so wonderful. And this is my guest. She's kind of like a co-host now, I think, for these segments that we're doing. Lori Simonovic. And Lori, could we off the top perhaps, well, however you want to run it. I wanted you to let them know again about you off the top before we get going and what you do.
I'm the president of Get Braver Incorporated. You can find me at getbraver.com. I do three key things: threshold conversation facilitation, executive coaching, and educational programming in the area of diversity, inclusion, and equity. So that's basically what I do. I don't have to get too much deeper into that. All of the information is on the site, unless you want me to. So we noticed from the clip, I think that's what you're asking me now, Sandra. It's just as good a clip as the other one that we, in my opinion, that we put on, except for the direction at the very end. But we were talking about the discipline of love and the connection to social justice, and ultimately healing our toxic culture. Right? We can't, because we have a matrix of intersections of domination and subordination, things like imperialism, capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, so many intersections, ableism, adultism, and so on. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that. And so one of the reasons that for me regarding the love piece is, to me, as helpful as civility, I've actually, which we can do another day, just yesterday pulled something together, what the difference between in the context of social justice and anti-oppression, the difference between, say, civility and love. As important as civility is, it doesn't go as deep as love can in this specific context. It's really, it's about behaving well more often than not within a Eurocentric context. So one of the things that Sandra and I did is, through the last number of podcasts that we've done, is we have three main learning objectives. The first one is developing a critical understanding of the history and impact of Eurocentricity. So that's examining the roots of Eurocentric thinking, its relationship to colonialism, imperialism, and all the systems that I've just mentioned, and its impact on groups that have been socially constructed in positions of subordination or under so-called dominant groups. And developing this kind of critical understanding, we can gain a deeper understanding of Eurocentricity and its effect on us as learners. I'm a lifelong learner, and we can begin to identify and challenge Eurocentric assumptions and biases. The second one is to develop critical consciousness and cultural humility, where we're kind of working where we're repairing and working in more kind of reciprocal ways in order to develop a critical consciousness and cultural humility. So this is about developing the ability to recognize and challenge Eurocentric biases and assumptions, and to appreciate the diversity and complexity of so-called non-European. We're saying non-European, just using the term non-European turns it into a binary of European at the center and everything else is around it, whereas that's not my worldview or my truth. There are multiple perspectives, beliefs, assumptions, and so on. It also involves developing skills to communicate and collaborate effectively with and across difference. And then, of course, as always, my lifelong passion is promoting social justice and equity. This is a crucial learning objective, collectively and individually in this specific context, to promote social justice and equity by taking action to challenge and dismantle Eurocentric structures and practices. This involves advocating for the inclusion of all perspectives. I'm not going to say non-European, let's say all. In education in all domains, and promoting policies and practices that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. It also involves challenging Eurocentric ideologies and practices that perpetuate systems of oppression and inequality. So these all sound great. I mean, if you want me to go through definitions of what Eurocentricity is, we've done it in some of the other shows, cultural humility and so on. We can do that. And there's sorry?
No, I was going to say, I would love you also to that piece on Gabramate in terms of the womb. And I mentioned, I think before we got on the show, the authenticity part, this little segment that I was listening to today when he was speaking about being authentic and coming out of that womb. And not thinking, you don't have a past to think about. You're not thinking maybe your epigenetic self, but you're not thinking of that. You're just hungry. Your gut's the important thing, you know. It's the authentic place, the most authentic place that we would ever be, is coming out of the womb and just depending on everything, and everything comes in terms of your needs for the most part, right? So that's one of the, I'd love you to add to that in just reading that little excerpt again and just really clarifying what that looks like, as I just mentioned about coming out of the womb and how authentic that, the insight of that part, you know, and we, of course, we're going to connect that to that what you're going to just speak about, the womb part of that, the government Whitehays talks about, the nurturing part of that when you're in the womb.
I love that you've said that, because that again brings it even deeper, and it's an example of both of us together learning to go deeper even into our own learning objectives, right? terms of how we keep honing every time we get together.
Yes.
Right. So last podcast, I'm not going to be speaking to Dr. Gabor Mate's work, but there was one quote that got both of us in this book: "The myth of normal, trauma, illness, and healing in a toxic culture." And when Sandra and I were speaking, Sandra asked me to read this quote again. You can stop me at any point, interrupt, or whatever.
Before you get started, I love resources that you bring on, because what I love about Lori is she doesn't like to take up all the air in the room, and I love that, so I give her more air. And she's very conscientious, okay, about not taking over the mic, and because she may know better, whatever. I love that attitude that she has, right? And I said that because her resources, which is really important to me in the terms of the work I do. I do something called double consciousness, two streams of thought, two social identities, has a lot to do with how people show up in the 21st century, that when transatlantic slave trade, apartheid, colonization, sub-Saharan, imperialism, all of that, how we show up, why we show up, how we show up in the 21st century. So a lot of my resources since I got woke, if we would say, has been listening to a lot of Black men, just some scholastic giants, and getting my information from them, because my perspective is them and they are me, and learning from everybody. But I love that your resources, a lot of them are from people of color, and I appreciate that very, very much, and that just gives me a sense of wholeness for my own self and connection to you and to all people. Really, it's not your fault or mine, but together we can do something about it, and that's really why she's here. One of the reasons she's here anyway, besides her wonderful work. So I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, thank you. That's what we're supposed to do, like you're teaching me.
That makes for a good show.
Sorry?
I said it makes for a good show. I like interruptions. It's good interruptions.
Yeah. Thank you. So as I said, we're not going to necessarily discuss his work. There's all kinds of stuff online. There's two pieces. I think it's called The Diary of a CEO out of England. 2 hour, and it's Gabor Mate, and there's two podcasts for 2 hours each that talk about his book. Fantastic. I really recommend it. I'll send it to you. I've already promised you, but anybody else that wants to ask me, I'm happy to send it to them. But
and he's European too, but I like his stuff. Where's he from?
Hungary, and he's of Jewish descent.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. There we go.
Yeah. I think that's what identifies. It's all about self-identification. So this quote is what you were just talking about in terms of coming from the womb. And he had quoted a lot of scientists, doctors, and has this incredible ability to talk about the science in a way that's understandable to the masses, in my opinion, because I'm certainly not a scientist, and I sometimes barely, but I'm understanding what he's talking about when he talks about science and birth and trauma and how that all connects, and that you just said, right? But then he said he has 3 children, and he asked his wife, who he sees as an expert. She's an artist. She's many things. Read the book and you'll find out. He asked her, he said, her name is Ray. I recently asked Ray if I could do it over again regarding the birth of their children, right?
She was pregnant at the time, right?
No, he asked her recently.
Oh, recently. Okay.
He was writing this book. He and his son wrote this book together.
Okay.
So I recently asked Ray if I could do it over again. I would have done so long before now. What would have supported her back then? I can't improve upon the wisdom nor the accuracy of her answer. It would have helped if I had a community in place. If there existed a larger consensus in our culture of what is required to gestate a baby. It would have helped if I had a doctor or a social worker or family member who could have stood up for me. If the doctor had asked me even once how I was faring emotionally. If anyone had phoned my husband, are you aware you are hurting your baby? Whatever problems you have with your wife, your role now is to be protective of her and of the infant she is carrying. We all need to realize that entering a pregnancy should be like entering a shrine, a sacred place and time. A baby is being built, which is what you talked about just a few minutes ago. Mental health needs to be on the curriculum as soon as a woman gets pregnant. Just as there are prenatal classes for physical birth, so there should be for the emotional birth. The woman's focus must be on the baby and not on the husband or even the job. The husband's focus, everyone's focus, must be on supporting the woman. Parents need to know that their job is mutual, that while the wife is pregnant, the husband is also pregnant. Society needs to protect pregnant women because everybody is creating this child. It takes the world to make a baby.
Wow.
So when Sandra and I were talking about this in the last podcast, one of the things we reflected on is what a different world this would be. I mean, this is such an example of profound respect. It's on page 145 if you have the book.
Yeah.
And one of the things that struck me after I read that is the piece around that. That's a lot of emotional intelligence and wisdom, that loving wisdom that this Ray is speaking to. And so then I started thinking about emotional intelligence, emotional intimacy, and emotional integrity in the context of social justice, anti-oppression work, and love. Because the difference between love and civility, I have no judgment of civility. It's important, but that's more about order, right? Whereas love is something profound. So I haven't read the second half of the book yet, but one of the things, we were talking about love as a foundation for social justice, and a few of the podcasts, both on the writing on the YouTube and also in introducing it, we spoke to that piece. We are speaking now to emotional intelligence, emotional intimacy, and emotional integrity in the context of love as a discipline, right? That was one of the ones that really, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Sandra, touched you. The one thing that I did want to surface, because when you think about it, trauma, illness, and healing in a toxic culture.
But Lori, sorry, hon, I'm interrupting. But could we go back just to give a little synopsis on this thing? Now, the idea about what you just read was the idea that a woman would be, pregnant and would have a team. If ideally, wouldn't this be wonderful? If she had a team of people speaking into her. Some women are very careful, and some cultures, some of my people absolutely in the continent this is a very important time for them. Not getting angry, not too, you're going to have fight with your people or your brothers and sisters, your spouse or whatever, but being conscious to bring that back to a place that's more holistic for that child, speaking into that child's life. A lot of my people read scriptures, beautiful things are said over this womb. So that I was just thinking of the how that can create, if you will, this authentic human being. This and such a humility in this individual. What would that do to a child coming out? We're talking about you just come out and you're ready to eat. It's just about you and your gut and you're hungry. But how does that when you're thinking of what was poured into that, right? Into that womb, into that child, spiritually speaking, that ability to come out and be that authentic. And his piece, like I mentioned before, on authenticity, I thought was so brilliant, because you're coming out and you've got this truth, as the scripture says, truth in the inward parts. That's authenticity. And we're trying to go back into the womb now and get that. We're trying to get back there and get that authenticity. And so I think when we talked, we read our umbrella there at the beginning, cultural humility. Oh, I think the humility, if we had that nurturing from the womb, that wouldn't be so, to connect those dots would not be so difficult, to have people that are humble enough to know that everybody's important, and we shouldn't even have words as marginalized and oppression and supremacy and all of these terms. Yeah, that just came to me in terms of
and I agree. And as I just mentioned, I'm really glad that you brought that piece in. Thank you for bringing that in. And in the context of social justice, oppression, and love, if we were going to have that kind of interconnectedness, there are many of us, myself included, because I'm still working on it, even though I've done therapy, I've done a whole bunch of stuff, right? But many of us have unprocessed trauma. And Dr. Gabor talks about both small t and large t, which is beyond the scope of today. But one of the things, apparently, well, not apparently, in the second half of the book, he talks about how healing can happen, because when we're triggered, we can say all this nice stuff, but there's healing that has to happen. And you've just mentioned some way. And so I just kind of came up with a definition in the context of social justice, of oppression and love. Healing refers to the processing of recovering from injury. Because there's so much injury out there, right?
Yes.
Trauma or systemic domination, marginalization by dominant groups through connection, understanding, and restoration. And some examples, we're not going to discuss this today, but I just don't want people thinking I'm losing sight. We're going to kind of do a segue into emotional intelligence. Things like processing the trauma. There's many different ways. Like one book is The Body Keeps the Score. Beautiful book. I haven't read it completely, but Bessel van der Kolk, right? There's so many different ways where you take the body into consideration also. Foster, and there's many other books of that nature. Fostering connection, restoring dignity, structural reforms, promoting, not even promoting, I used the wrong word there. I'm stuck in my Eurocentric thinking. I have to rethink now. So it's not promoting empowerment, it's living empowerment, reciprocal context, self-reflection, and cultural humility. Those are just a few. So I thought, okay, what are some of the ways? So there's the three. Before I go there, is there anything that you wanted to say about that?
No, I just was going to say that I love that. Healing refers to processing the trauma, because there is sometimes, even in church or spiritually, we want to spiritualize everything, but faith without works is dead. So that's the scripture, and I love it, because faith without works is dead. We can have all the niceties and the loveliness and just love, love, love. And that's important, but healing, reprocessing the trauma, of which a lot of people, our Indigenous brothers and sisters, many tribes are very aware of on some level, that the doing and, leaning into the discomfort and looking at yourself in the mirror can be, it's an okay thing to do, and having people you can trust that can walk with you through that healing, that process is so important when we're talking about love, social justice, and the discipline of love, right? Integrity of love, like all of that. It means that we have to have this sort of truth. I shouldn't tell nobody what to do. We don't have to have anything, but to choose where we're going to think, okay, I want to do something about this situation. I want to look at how authentic can I be? The fact that I have to have these things. And I love Gabor Mate. There's one thing he said, that you don't get authentic by, trying to be authentic. It's by noticing that you're not authentic, right? Spirit of truth, which is God's love. It comes to, and if you want to choose to do something or go in a different direction, you can. But that spirit that comes, that truth that comes over us will show us, wait a second. I saw it today in myself at work. I'm seeing where I'm fake. I'm seeing where, you know what I mean? It's all that the authenticity I am lacking. So yeah, I love talking about the integrity of love, and really the authenticity that comes with that, the truth about love, And
it's a daily work of moving towards our own freedom and consciousness collectively and individually, as important as it is to seek safety. Sometimes when we're traumatized, we're just focused on seeking safety. And it's often the sponsoring emotion is fear, right?
Yes, of course.
And when sponsoring emotion is fear, we tend to find ourselves in connections of pain as opposed to connections of peace. Well, part of it's natural, but like, how much do we want to repeat the pattern, and how much do we want to heal the pattern? And that's just a small piece of work. I remember my therapist said that once you do the emotional work, I don't know if it's ever over, but those 5 years that I did with her, she said, your spiritual potential, your intellectual potential, all of it your job, everything will catapult. And she was so right. I was already fairly successful person. I mean, I don't even like to call myself that, like happy with where I was. I was a community mental health consultant at the time and doing incredible work. I was really honored for the work that I was doing, but the work that I've done since that healing is just different now, because I have tools now where I'm not sabotaging myself, for example, around self-love. And that's in all areas of life. It takes time. Right.
It does. And I admire young people like my nephews, my nieces, and that kind of age group where I love that people want to get there real quick, but you do need a few years for the experience too, but because don't despise your youth, because you can do amazing things out there, 25, 30, but there's a level of experience that takes time in certain things in life, It just doesn't happen like that. But on you go, Lorianne. I shouldn't call you that. That's not nice, Lorianne. Her name is Lori. Okay.
Okay. It feels like love, so I'm good. What was I going to say? So there's the three pieces. I'll give you the definition. So this is just one. I'm sure there's many definitions. Emotional intelligence can refer to the ability to recognize, understand, manage, and where necessary, heal one's own emotions and relationships. So that's why I mentioned the healing piece. And some key aspects of emotional intelligence involve things like self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, conscientiousness, Freudi's conscientization, where it's kind of very similar to the critical consciousness, going right. in, looking in for more than one worldview and so on. I'm going to go later a bit more into the so-called managing and how that can be conceptualized of emotions in terms of the emotional intelligence. And these overlap, but I think they're a little bit different. So emotional intimacy in the context of love and social justice refers to the ability to forge profound connections with others through mutual vulnerability, openness, and empathy across difference and similarity. I always added that in there. So, for example, vulnerability is a willingness to reveal, as you just said, your authentic emotions, experiences, fears, and challenges to foster trust and understanding. And it's letting down walls, right? So around anti-racism work as a white woman, there's some difficult moments, but a little bit of bravery and presence and vulnerability.
How has it been difficult for you? So that an example.
Like a lot of white people, I don't want to be racist, right? And it hurts if I've made a mistake or if I've made an assumption that it happens to be the Black woman that's the CEO, but I'm not sure, right? Because and she's dressed a little more relaxed than maybe the guy in the suit, and I might assume that the white guy, I might assume that he's I don't usually assume, but I might think, I wonder if he's a CEO, but I'm not thinking of her right away because of how the system's set up. And that's me right now being defensive. No, that's because that assumption is within me, right?
Oh, I love that. And that's authentic in itself. Right? It's truly, I think that's honest and refreshing because it is in us. And even if like I walk into a room with you and I walk into a room and there's a big event, say, and the people looking at us, if we were to really put the words to what people might be thinking, they see you, they see me, and there's a whole different sort of pattern of thinking as I speak and I sit down with sister girls and I get all this reality from my friends, my white sister girls, and stuff, because they tell me the truth, because we've known each other over I think it's 30 years. But just really what they think, what people think of different groups, what you think of an Indigenous person if they walk in the room. I think that is very, that in itself, to hear what people really think of each other.
I've been looking at stats for years and I could use the excuse but the stats say only this percent, blah, blah, blah. But I've been in this work for decades and it still comes up. It would have come up more before, but you just keep doing the work because you go deeper and deeper. And
I love that. You're all up in the levels of awareness, unconscious unawareness. You're aware of your unawareness and you're doing something about it. That's great. Reality.
So and then the third one, I've written quite a bit on it, but I'm learning how to just, because we only have this much time, right? So I'm giving 3 examples in each of these emotional pieces. Emotional integrity in the context of social justice and love refers to aligning one's emotions and external actions with an ethical commitment to truth, justice, and compassion. And some of the key components are
I'm sorry, that one was again. So sorry.
a commitment to truth, justice, and compassion. There's of course much more, but those are some. And how to do that is, for example, authenticity, expressing our emotions in a way that are honest and transparent rather than performative. If I was more, and we all do it because sometimes we have to perform or we're dead in the water, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes if we're so performative, we're not going to be in an authentic place, right?
So what does performative look like?
So what I just said about I think I'm smart enough to say, well, actually it's because of the stats. And that's why I thought that. But I also know on an authentic level that I was trained that white guys are in power.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever the emotional baggage behind that is, I don't have my emotional baggage is around patriarchy maybe, right? And that's not fair, right? But I'm also very aware that there's injustice in the world. And I'm just going to assume more often than not that the white guy has the power.
Well, we're fighting systems too,
I've been
right?
in situations where he's the secretary.
Yeah.
Wearing a suit, and he's getting respect as a secretary in a different way than a woman as a secretary. So there's so many intersections.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Go.
Okay, so then the self-reflection, which we've talked about before, courage, vulnerability, and so on. In each of these are important. So then there's because you were interested in the emotional intelligence where things are happening simultaneously. Mm-hmm. I sort of took a bunch of synonyms and got examples for them. So some synonyms for manage are attune, calibrate, assessing, going to the calibrate. I really went in deep with that one. Relate, synergize, and so on. So I'm going to tell you what I mean. When referring to managing emotions or relationships in the context of emotional intelligence, some synonyms that connote more reciprocity and connection. So when we talk about management, we talk about kind of top down, right? Where I'm your manager, I'm your boss, that word that I often use, and you're accountable to me. We can sugarcoat that and say, no, that's not fair. We can say, no, there is an accountability. You can't ignore it. It is a hierarchy and you are responsible to this manager. But it really is an up-down relationship. If we're going to flatten the relationships, one of the things that we can do is attune. So bring our emotions into harmony with others through awareness and responsiveness.
What was that, attune?
Yes. And so an example of that might be a social worker deeply listening to better understand a client's grief and validate their feelings. So I'm going to bring up what I talked about in the first podcast, because you talked about the Indigenous context a few minutes ago. Dr. Duran, sorry, I can't remember his first name now, in The Healing of the Soul Wound, gave actual concrete examples of, and he's a professor also where he was teaching students. And there's 2 examples that I want to give from the book. The one example was his students really wanted to learn more about, I've talked about this before, various Indigenous nations. And he thought that was wonderful, because you want to learn about the so-called other or the so-called oppressed, right? But he said, you have work to do too. Go discover your own cultures. Because that Eurocentricity these wouldn't be his words. This is my interpretation, right? Learning about where you come from, learning about both the shadow and Canada might be proud of the Raptors, but there's also stuff to not be proud of, like what happened to Indigenous people, what happened to Black people, and so on. So taking accountability for all of it through the learning, and that learning takes emotion, and we have to attune to what that is. He talked about supervision. This is a second example. So it might be a person that's a white person who has a lot of knowledge around the Eurocentric valid ways of doing therapy, cognitive therapy, whatever, but maybe don't have as much knowledge in the Indigenous context, and you're serving Indigenous clients. he said, what you can do is have two supervisors, one for the Indigenous and one piece, and one for the European piece.
Mm-hmm.
And so he gives these various examples, and then it's a lot easier for the social worker to tune in to the client. So calibrating, which is still part of managing, is skillfully balancing and adjusting one's emotions in tune with a situation or relationship.
Is that part of the attuning part?
No, this is different. Actually, they're all interrelated, because I'm taking the word management. I've gotten a whole bunch of synonyms and then just gave examples, right? So skillfully, so the calibration is kind of a war word, but in an anti-oppression, but oppression is kind of a war, and that's why I put it in there. To calibrate refers to the ability to, as I said, to skillfully adjust one's behaviors, speech, approaches, or strategies to thoughtfully take into account power dynamics and potential harm to groups that have been pushed to the margins. And some key aspects of calibration might include a teacher, for example, adjusting her tone or his tone when a student, or their tone when a student gets frustrated, to de-escalate and reconnect.
Okay, and that's calibration.
Yes.
That's interesting. And so the meaning of that in a nutshell is what?
The ability to skillfully adjust our behaviors, speech, approaches, or strategies to thoughtfully take into account power dynamics and potential harm to groups that have been marginalized by the so-called dominant group.
Interesting. You know, I might add, I also think that calibration part and managing your emotions part, I want to kind of flip that around for a minute, because I think when people come from the continent, we've brought here hundreds of years, some of us have been here, some of us stayed home. I think we can collaborate. I think we can, like, somehow I feel like, even when you're talking about cultural humility, it fits here too. Just adjusting our behaviors in the way we think of ourselves, or we are taught to think of ourselves in this construct, that also takes effort.
Absolutely.
That takes sitting with someone that perhaps most of the people I might talk to might say that looks like you. You know, I'm sitting with a Black therapist or someone to talk that through, so that you're not sort of living out this prophetic utterance that has been dictated by the construct that you're now in, you know, that says you are less than, or you're this, you're that. But you mentioned something about culture, and I've been talking about that lately. And going back, getting to know yourself authentically has a lot to do with your heritage, your culture, where you came from. And that I would encourage anybody, as I'm coaching, just, you know what, where are you from? Okay, if there's a challenge, going back to your ancestry on some level too, right? And collaborating, those that are, say, so-called marginalized can actually benefit from that, humbling themselves to that, and not in, you know, I'm trying to say, working through the minutia of assimilating without the fundamental strength of your cultural, you know, looking at your cultural essence of your people, who you are, and what that offers you. Do you know what I'm saying?
I understand what I'm about to say is a false binary, but while I'm speaking, I'm speaking to both the so-called assimilated and assimilators. Right? This lens is a little bit more from because we all have, again, positions of dominance and oppressions within us in terms of our social identity, right? So part of that is, you know, we're on a very similar wavelength. I talked about assessing imbalance. Right?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
recognizing inherent power differences between the so-called dominant and subordinate, you know, groups, and understanding privilege. So that's looking at both, right, and working that out, checking our assumptions, examining preconceived notions and internalized prejudice that may unconsciously or consciously influence our actions, which is exactly what you just talked about. Thinking about, especially in the beginning when we're doing, intention is great, but it's about impact. And it's getting into that discomfort, as we talked about earlier today and in other podcasts, considering how our words, decisions, policies may disproportionately impact whole communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those are just a few. And actually, I'll do this last one. Navigating and using discomfort as a learning tool. We've talked about that before. Recalibrating when called out on missteps to learn rather than become defensive. Allowing growth through discomfort, which we've talked about even through a post-traumatic growth lens. Where would you like to go from here?
Oh, I want to hear more about this emotional intelligence. I mean, regulating your emotions so you're not at the mercy of your behaviors, definitely. But how do people do that? I love it, connecting that discipline of love to the discipline of love, and discipline of love, emotional intelligence, and connecting that to social justice. That's huge. People might ask, how do I feel like people are treating me this way at work. Different groups, so-called marginalized, perhaps they're treating me this way, and I can't stand it. I'm going to tell them off, or I'm going to call the union in, or whatever. In terms of the discipline of love and emotional intelligence, how does that person connect that? Because we're talking about whole intersections of social justice, but how do they do the discipline of love and the emotional intelligence in all of the intersections of oppression?
So love is is integrity and intimacy and intelligence, because intelligence, I think that emotional intelligence is an aspect of love. That's just my take on it, right? So what you're talking about now is the relating, where we interact with our emotions in a way that foster positive, loving connection with others. And that's what's in our heart, right? Then the outcome is going to be different than if I'm talking to you. I have to be civil. I have to behave, right? And maybe I'm not giving civility enough of a break, because order is important, right? My life's work is much more focused on the passion and the love of social justice, right?
Right.
There's synergizing, coordinating one's feelings productively with others to achieve mutual goals. And that's still around the managing of the emotions. For example, activists, this is not a prescribed statement, it's just a possibility, channeling anger into coordinated campaigns for justice.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the Black Lives Matter is all about love.
Well, we have some different thoughts on that. We could go backstage with that one. But for me, everybody, Black Lives Matter is Malcolm Little, aka Malcolm X, James Baldwin, and I think fundamentally there's a lot missing the fundamentals of Black Lives Matter. But anyhow, that's a whole other situation.
Okay.
But the emotional integrity part, we were talking about that. Do you have something to say on that?
Emotional integrity, let's find it.
Emotional integrity.
I do. I want to, because I was really thinking about this. So we're going to go past civility.
Yeah, love is this huge topic, everybody. Like we know, I mean, I look at Corinthians in the scriptures has this whole thing on love. And I think when I read it, I think, who can do that? One thing, love suffers long. That's one thing it says, which is amazing, because that's true. I think of a mother with her kids, Lori. I think of some of my sister girls with their kids, and I think trying to be good mothers. Some people don't have the components maybe given them or passed to them so they can do maybe like my sister girls are doing with their kids, doing very well and really striving, and heart-wrenching when children do something, young adults that are really out of where you are coming from or where you would like them to be or to go. But yeah, this love thing is huge, and I'm considering, when I think of the for my own people, Okay, when I think of emotional integrity or emotional intelligence, connecting that to social justice, the discipline of loving. It doesn't mean you have to tolerate nonsense either. I would think, right? It doesn't mean you have to tolerate anything. Um, but having, I don't know what would your take be on emotional integrity?
So, I mean, integrity comes from the word whole, I think, if I remember correctly.
Mhm.
Um, and it's about, as you said, authenticity. It's a commitment to truth. There are multiple truths, obviously. We just had that a few minutes ago.
Mhm.
Justice, compassion, and so on. I think that the core of it is to authentically express our emotions in a way that are honest and as I said earlier, transparent rather than performative. Um, that we're congruent, ensuring our emotions and behaviors align with and reflect our professed values, equality, and care. Like, do I put my money where my mouth is?
Mhm.
There I go to capitalism, but that's an example, right? It's not just it's dismantling capitalism in a way when you're contributing toward flattening capitalism. Examination, willingness to investigate emotions like defensiveness, anger, or fear with nuance rather than reacting. I know there's been a few times when you and I, more than a few times when you and I have been talking, and you speak to what you're feeling. You actually said some words like, okay, that probably doesn't sound like love. And then I went to this place and I thought, love, right? To me,
Yeah.
that's emotional integrity. That's examining yourself and being a responsibility, the ability to respond and take ownership of our own emotions and
Mm.
impact on others without projecting blame externally. It's really easy when we get triggered
Wow.
to just like say, that's not what I meant, and just get into this defense attack dance. It's just exiting that dance of defense and attack is really the two. Well, this is, of course, miracles, but the defense and attack are the same energy.
Okay.
When you're defending yourself, you're asking your brother or sister to attack you in a way. That's the deal, right? Or when you're attacking somebody, you're asking them to defend themselves. I'm taking it to a deeper level because sometimes you need to go to court, you need to do things, right? That
Right.
and
Right.
defense or attack. But you exit that dance of defense and attack, and you speak your truth from a place of peace. And I say it once and see if it sits, but I'm not going to, as I hope, and I'm sure I get passionate sometimes, put it down somebody's throat. Or
Hmm.
keep going forward with, a principled anchoring of emotions and actions against a steadfast moral code that's envisioned both collectively and individually of social justice and universal human rights. What are we working towards? And then what is the emotion with that? Because when you think about things like racism, ableism, and so on, it's not this intellectual thing. I see it expressed through negativity, through hate sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whether we want to admit it or not, um, it's an emotional thing. Like Dr. Gabor Mate said, he's really influenced me. The foundation of our cognitive is the emotion. You talked about the baby stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Coming out of the womb, and we carry that with us our whole lives. We feel certain ways about stuff. Maybe we've learned how to hide it or not even feel because of trauma, but even if we're not showing that feeling, it's there. So a trigger is usually emotional. It can be, rage, like the red mist. It could be, there's an anger that's healthy and there's an anger it just gets you deeper and deeper into the red mist, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've learned to appreciate a number of different groups in my life, people, women that are honest, even from doing the work I do, just honest about their feelings, white, black, and different, that really have gone through some trauma in their lives, some horrible things. And I mean, and the race thing, yes, that's a different intersection on it in itself. But if you're generally speaking about that, I mean, compounded, this is, blacks and darker the skin, the more you dehumanize the individual, no matter how much you try to think about that and you say it's stupidity, it does affect you as you've
Mhm.
come through the time warp on some level. There's no doubt about it,
And yeah.
And I listened to Thomas Sowell. We kind of clash, but yet there's so much that he says that I have ingested. He doesn't. He has his take on, us always. People are always talking about the race, using the race card, and saying white supremacy, all of these words that can, he feels, sort of induce something instead of just love in an action is how I'm paraphrasing it, but doing what you need to do and acting upon it. Like I mentioned before, you and I walk in a room, so they're going to look at you differently perhaps than they're going to look at me. They probably will, depending on everybody's in the room.
Depending on the context. Yeah.
Right. And they may look at me one way, and I've seen it, I've heard it. So you're in the skin long enough, you hear things, right? Indigenous people have heard things. They have experienced it firsthand. So it's real. Yeah. But I love Thomas Sowell's thing on this, like it's really a little bit of Dr. Martin Luther thrown in there. It's really about what am I doing as a human being? I then become a human being, and how much am I contributing to the whole white supremacy vibe and the Black Lives Matter vibe? Do I understand what's even behind that and who's benefiting from Black Lives Matter? Hello, financially. What is it? Does it really have to do with Black Lives Matter? Where's the money going? So all of that's a whole other thing. But I'm saying if we have other pieces around what triggers us emotionally when we're talking about the emotionally integrity, a lot of it has to do with knowledge as well.
Right. Yeah, and I've already said to you before, and I around that piece that you just mentioned, I don't have any knowledge in that area, so I can't even comment around the money piece. So yeah. So regarding the courage that you just mentioned, in terms of the emotional integrity, it's expressing emotions with conviction to challenge oppression, even in the face of backlash. I sometimes when I'm speaking to this, it sounds like I'm saying, okay, let's all be nice. I'm not saying that.
Oh, I don't think so at all.
Okay. Yeah. So because like you think about emotion, right? So when you're processing trauma, that rage has to be processed. My first 8 months in therapy, I raged. I had a safe place where I could rage.
Right.
I said, okay, we've done this for 8 months. Like, let's go and figure out some other pieces of, where there might have been peace or love. And I was amazed. She found some stuff. I went under hypnosis, and I was really happy about that. And my parents were crying and happy, and I got to share it with them. So in this work, it's very emotional work, fraught with messiness. I mean, that's
absolutely. And I think I always say to a good coach needs a coach. Same with, I would think a therapist too. Like, you know what I mean? And to be that humble, that cultural humility, whatever culture you identify with or as, or however that looks, to have that humility as an individual. And when I started to get stronger is when I got the knowledge about my people and as much as I can. I don't know other people, but I can only live this way one time. I only have so much time. But when I find things out about people from the continent and beyond, that humbles me and gives me a different emotional integrity as a woman of color, Black woman, so-called byword.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you think about emotional, what was the second one? Intimacy. Vulnerability is used in a different way than it might be in terms of emotional integrity. So let me give you an example. In emotional
intimacy.
Thank you. Intimacy. She can read my mind. Intimacy. There's more. You're building a deep connection. Usually, it's not like you're going in and it's just you're surrendering yourself and you're getting to know each other outside of being too heavy, right? Because there's a place for that. It might be therapy or healing groups, but in a relationship, that kind of emotional intimacy can be built in the context of social justice also.
Is that a relationship with yourself, you mean, or otherwise?
With so-called other, because I'm you, you're me. Like we're getting to know each other. There's difference and sameness, and there's different ways that we move forward. In the context of integrity, it's letting down facades of invulnerability. That prevent authentic connection and understanding. So the first one is about authentic connection and understanding, but just acknowledging that a lot of what we're doing in the integrity piece is that many of us have facades, right? We have to do it certain ways. We have to dress in certain ways.
Lori, you believe it's 4 minutes too? 5 minutes? 5, 6 minutes too? Well, I'll tell you, this conversation we need to continue.
Sure.
And I think it's worth continuing. As speaking to some of my friends, my sister girls, like just even as we're growing, as most of them are 60 or over, under some of them for sure. But we can see each other as you get older, and if you're doing the work, you don't just get older. And I mean, you could be older and you've got a lot of stuff you might agree is missing in your life because maybe the work, but it's not too late to start this work, honestly.
It's never too
Because
late.
I'm feeling freedom from the inside out that I've never felt in my whole life. It's like the best time in my life. And I just I had this opportunity to sing at this event last week. And I'm telling you, I sung in a way people were like, oh my gosh, your voice. And they've heard me sing before, but it's something that's happening from here out.
I get it. Yep.
Also the work that I'm doing again,
Yes,
I've got to train. So I'm still training, and faith without works is dead. So I still got to do something. And I love that part of our conversations. It's not just, you're so fantastic, like all this can happen, but you work at it. You've done a lot of work in your life. So let's pick up next time. This has been great. And applause, Lori. Thank you so much for sharing your work.
Thank you.
And we will meet and debrief and do all of that. Thank you for joining us. We're just trying to keep it real here and hoping in the process that whatever exudes from us that is truth and you find authentic, that it may encourage you. I would appreciate knowing that that's true. Thank you so much for being here. Voices of Humanity, forgot the name of the show, coming to you from PureConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. Please join us again. We appreciate you so much. Bye for now. Say bye, Lori. Bye-bye.